If we want to solve this equation by completing the square, first we have to get it in the right form equals 0. So we'll have 5x squared minus 8x, now minus 3 equals 0. A is the coefficient of x squared, so it's 5. B is the coefficient of x, so that's negative 8. And C is the constant term, negative 3. We're going to use using x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So using that with these variables, negative b, so negative of negative 8 is a positive 8, plus or minus the square root of negative b squared, negative 8 of b squared. Negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64, minus 4 times a times c. Well, a is 5, c is negative 3, so a times c will be negative 15, all over 2 times a, so that will be 10. Simplifying this, we'll find out x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 4 times 15 is 60 all over 10. Further simplifying, x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 124 all over 10. Now, we need to simplify the radical, and a perfect square that fits into 124, you'll find that that's 4 times 31. And you do need to know your perfect squares to be able to simplify. So we now have x equals 8 plus or minus square root of 4 is 2, and that's how that comes out, times the square root of 31 all over 10. Now you might notice we have three terms, 8, 2, and 10. They are all 8 and 2 times the square root of 31 and 10. We all have even numbers. So I can factor out a 2 and x equals 4 plus or minus, square 2 goes into 2 once, so 31, square root of 31 all over 2 goes into 10 5 times. Notice I was able to take my 2 into all three terms. It must go into all three terms to be able to simplify and find out that this is my solution. It's helpful to look at the discriminant. And we can determine the types of solutions to a quadratic equation by looking at this expression b squared minus 4ac. That's called the discriminant. It's the part that's under the square root in the quadratic formula. It determines if the quantity inside is positive, negative, or 0. If it is positive, there are two different real solutions. If it is negative, there's one real solution. If it is equal to 0, there's one real solution. And if it is negative, there's no real solution. What happens for a graph of these, if it's positive, you might have the graph cross the axis. If there's one real solution, your parabola just comes down and touches the x-axis and goes right back. If there is no real solution, when you graph that parabola, whether it opens up or down, you will find that it does not touch the x-axis. And here are those aids. So here's the graph. This crosses the x-axis twice, has two real solutions. Factoring, graphing, or the quadratic formula work for solving it. Here's a graph that touches but does not cross the x-axis. It has one real solution. Factoring, graphing, or the square root method works best for it. When it does not touch, Graph does not touch the x-axis, it has no real solutions, and you're going to have to use the quadratic formula to solve that. And here are some more equations to try solving. X squared equals negative 36. Well, we're going to use the square root formula here because I've got just an x squared equals. So x equals plus or minus, still plus or minus, the square root of negative 36. To get the negative out, I remember that I equals the square root of negative 1. So what I do is just bring an I out. That's the square root of negative 1. I still keep the plus or minus. So now I've got I times the square root of 36. Well, you know the square root of 36 is 6I. We keep the plus or minus. So my solution to this equation is x equals plus or minus 6I. Here we've got just an x squared. Let's get it by itself. 3x squared will equal negative 36. Divide by 3, x squared will equal negative 12. Take the square root of both sides, so I'll have plus or minus the square root of negative 12. Well, that's a negative 1 times 4 times 3. So x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 is I, the square root of 4 is 2, and 3 does not have a perfect square, so it stays underneath. So x equals plus or minus 2I times the square root of 3 becomes that solution.